We're now joined by Stephen Turton. He is adjunct professor of Environmental Geography Research Division at the Central Queensland University. Professor, thank you so much for joining us. The first question is really, if you had to pick one immediate policy or practical step governments should take right now to reduce future flood losses, whether at the infrastructure or community level, what would it be and why would it move the needle fastest?
That's a good question, but I guess in the short term, we have to deal with the recovery of this, what is a major humanitarian disaster impacting a number of nation states in South and Southeast Asia. So I think that has to take precedence, but clearly I think there's a call for greater awareness of early warning systems, and it's quite patchy across the region in terms of how these are deployed. Some areas don't have any at all, others do. These provide a lot of value in terms of dealing with multiple threats or hazards. And, for example, it could be heavy rain or strong winds, or could even be an earthquake that occurs around the same time that could trigger more landslides. So the early warning systems, globally, it's shown that where they are in place and very effective, the death toll from natural disasters such as this are actually falling. So to me, that should be a real focus for the countries that are affected, especially those that don't have particularly effective early warning systems at this stage.
Yeah, speaking of early warning systems, just want to ask you, in practical terms, what does a functioning early warning system really look like in remote or low-income districts in Southeast Asia or South Asia?
Well, obviously, it requires state-of-the-art ways of communicating with particularly the remote community. So that requires a lot of infrastructure to be put in place. And we saw this after the Indian Ocean tsunami, where there was no tsunami warning system at all for the Indian Ocean, and now there is one in place. So next time there's a tsunami, hopefully there won't be anything like the death toll that we saw back in 2004. So I think it would involve, obviously, in those more remote communities, having ways of communicating to the villagers or the people in those vulnerable communities that there was actually a flood coming their way or heavy rainfall. So that requires a whole of government approach, but it does require international support to help roll out a system like that.
And scientists often really talk about a climate change fingerprint in extreme weather. So based on the latest evidence and whatever's really happening in Asia right now, how confident can we be that warming has really made these November floods worse? And in what ways does this really suggest that our current flood risk maps are already outdated?
Yes, well, I think clearly there's evidence that the Asian monsoon region is already experiencing much greater intensity rainfall and flash flooding associated with monsoonal activity and also with typhoons and tropical cyclones. And there's also a hotspot for future global warming where there's expected to be an intensification of monsoon conditions during the various monsoon stages, so the southwest monsoon, the northeast monsoon. That actually affects billions of people over many nation states, from South Asia right through to Southeast Asia, and of course, it extending even into Northern Australia. So we have to realise that this is a global hotspot for climate change, mainly because of the warming of the oceans in the region that is actually supercharging the global water cycle. The more heat that we put into the atmosphere can hold more moisture, and when conditions are right, it comes down as heavy rainfall. So that really is a really big threat. Major climate risk for this region is more intense rainfall, but also more intense tropical cyclones and typhoons when they form, which obviously brings other threats like storm surges and obviously very strong winds as well.
And human-driven factors such as deforestation, poor land use and planning may also contribute to some of these that we are seeing right now. Are countries in the region really investing enough in climate-resilient infrastructure? Things like drainage upgrades, flood barriers, mangrove restoration, and even better rainwater management. Where are the biggest gaps?
Well, clearly deforestation, both illegal and legal, is rampant through some of these areas. And there's no doubt it's interacting to make the impacts of these severe rainfall events more severe. We do know that forested catchments, you get much less erosion, you get much less runoff. Once you denude the catchment, as we saw in a lot of images, we've got logs that have been washed downstream across villages, and those logs have recently been cut down in the upper areas of the watershed. So there's no doubt at all that deforestation has exacerbated the impacts in some of the areas that have been impacted by this multi-weather event system, from Sri Lanka right through to, well, clearly to Malaysia, but also southern Thailand and northern parts of Sumatra in Indonesia. So it's a multi-country impact. In terms of infrastructure, clearly infrastructure is lagging behind in many of these areas because we have rising sea level adding another layer to the impact for the low-lying areas where water backs up. And with rising sea level, more areas are likely to go under in the future. A lot of the communities are actually in areas that are close to sea level, and that's a big threat. Infrastructure like bridges and roads, well, clearly the infrastructure is struggling even with the old climate, let alone being prepared for dealing with the new climate. And this is not just an issue in developing countries. This is happening in countries like Australia, where wealthy countries are struggling with their infrastructure in terms of building resilience to more severe weather events as well. But nothing on the scale that we've seen with this event.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. Stephen Turton, Adjunct Professor of Environmental Geography Research Division at the Central Queensland University.